give birth to you here, that means you were born under the jurisdiction. We need to find a way to change that. It may take a constitutional amendment. Maybe it'll just take getting the Supreme Court to revisit the issue. I'm not sure. But you're right. The anchor baby problem is a huge problem. By anchor baby, I mean they'll come over here. They'll have a child. The child is then a citizen. The child is then entitled to all of these social welfare benefits, regardless of what other laws might require. So, yeah, it's very astute of you to point that out. Now, Chris, getting back to your overall question, this actually all ties in. Because you can't effectively address the immigration problem without thoroughly addressing the problem of entitlements generally. The whole reason we have this massive immigration problem, a lot of it relates to the fact that there is an excess, there was at least for a number of years, an excess of demand for labor. One of the reasons why there was such an excess of demand for labor was because we've given U.S. citizens an option. You can either go to work, in which case you've got to pay taxes. Most of you will have to work 4 or 5 months out of the year just to pay your taxes. Or you can choose not to work, and many of you will be entitled to social welfare benefits. And let's face it, for most of us, most of the time, it's a lot more fun not to work than to work. So if we give people that option, they're not going to work, and there's going to be an excess of demand for labor. I was disgusted a few years ago when I heard President Clinton in a State of the Union address say we need to create a special visa category so that businesses can hire foreign laborers, foreign citizen laborers, to do jobs that no American would want to do. And I thought, what the heck does that mean? Sorry, I said heck again. That's going to get me in trouble. I'm sure the sheriff's on his way. What does that mean that no American would want to do? I mean, we're an entrepreneurial society. Well, if the price is right, we'll take the job. And if there's no other work, we'll take a job that's sort of unpleasant. But that's not so when the government steps in and decides to be everybody's rich uncle. That tells us, hey, if you don't want to work, that's okay, you don't have to. So I don't think we're ever going to really solve the immigration problem until we solve the entitlement problem, which is the federal government should be in the entitlement business. Now, as far as the Constitution says, I suppose a state, if it wants to, like say Vermont or California, if they want to be socialist, as long as they still have a Republican form of government, it's arguable that the Constitution won't prohibit them from doing so. We could get into some deep debates about whether the Constitution would prohibit that. There are some theories upon which it would. But the big problem is getting the government, the federal government, out of that business. If a state wants to do so, it will do so to its own destruction and devastation. If California wants to be socialist, people will move away from California in troves. Oh, wait a minute, they already are doing that. But if they had some place to flee, some place that was a haven where they could live free of socialism, like, say, Utah, then they would do that to an even greater degree. But we can't prove to be that haven completely because we ourselves are subject to this federal master that thrusts socialism upon us. And socialism isn't something that they're empowered to do. So, forgive me for speaking frank about socialism, but that's what we're dealing with. Yes, sir.
So there's been a big move by groups like Council on Foreign Relations, which our former Governor Huntsman was a member of, or still is, I believe, to create regional governments, much like the European Union, and have been doing that through trade agreements. What is your feeling on that, and what are you trying to do about it?
It's reprehensible. It's shameful. It's terribly frightening. And I would resist any effort to move in a direction of a one-world government or a regional government beyond the borders of the United States. Look, we've got, first of all, we've got all we can handle at home, but more importantly, our oath to the Constitution, our Pledge of Allegiance that we take, you know, we're pledging allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. I wish there were some way we could work into that for the Constitution that established the republic for which it stands. That's really what we're taking that oath to. And that oath doesn't countenance a regional, semi-hemispheric government or a world government. giving up that kind of sovereignty, as you have to give up when you enter into these regional alliances or world governments, isn't constitutional, and it isn't right, and it isn't wise, and it ultimately, inevitably, inexorably erodes individual liberty. Because remember, whenever a government acts, it acts at the expense of individual liberty. A lot of the time it's worth it to have government erode individual liberty to the extent necessary to tell us that we can't do something like steal. Laws telling me that I can't steal from you protect both of us. So even though it might erode my individual liberty in some way, our liberty as a whole is enhanced because of the fact that I can't steal from you. But governments have to be constrained in what they can do to make sure that they don't go beyond protecting life, liberty, and property. Because when they do, bad things happen. When we go to a global government or a government that's more than national, those interests aren't protected. Sad experiences has shown us. So, I think we should get out of the United Nations. I think and while I like the objective of moving toward freer trade generally, I don't think we should belong to international trade agreements that create international government bureaucracies to whom we have to relinquish a certain amount of our sovereignty. We don't need that. All we need are laws that Congress is empowered to write saying, here's what our trade policy is. We don't need some global government doing that. As to the Council on Foreign Relations, maybe this is part of what you're getting at. The Council on Foreign Relations, while not a government body, is an institution of which many are understandably, justifiably leery because its founding members, and many of its members today, and its founding documents all stood for the proposition that we need to move in the direction of a one-world government. And I find that really, really alarming.
And they dominate our government.
And they dominate our government.
For so long. Bush's cabinet was CFR, most of Obama's cabinet is...
Both Bush's cabinets.
Yeah.
And I suspect Clinton's, and quite sure Obama's as well.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, you could look through probably the last 6, 7, 8 presidential administrations and find it populated with person after person after person who was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, they have the right under the Constitution peaceably to assemble with whomever they want, but they don't have the right, I think, to be in every presidential administration without people getting really suspicious, as we should be. And we should hold people accountable.
But most people don't even know there. You
Exactly.
ask your state representative. The CF who?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Oh, yeah. Okay, apparently the food's here. Now, do you want me to continue asking questions while they're delivering your food? Okay, yeah, we'll keep going there. Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Bridgewater has small business experience. What will you do to help us get jobs? And also, the other one is, what will you do for tort reform of medical malpractice suits?
I'm a big fan of tort reform. Tort reform is absolutely essential. If there's one thing government ought to be doing, this is consistent with what I'm talking about government getting out of the way in order to solve the problem. People think that in order to control healthcare costs, we need more government, and that's wrong, and it's exactly backwards. We need government to get out of the way, and one of the ways we can do that is by limiting the reach of government in the direction of things like punitive damages for punitive damages awards against doctors, hospitals, drug companies, things like that. If we just limited that, we could go a long way toward controlling costs. Some of that could be accomplished through federal legislation. Much of it would be more appropriate for state legislation because it's state law generally that governs tort suits. There are some areas in which it's appropriate to deal with punitive damage liability in the medical malpractice and drug liability area with federal legislation, but a lot of it is also state legislation. So, good question there. As to the small business experience,